$50 million. That was the secret buried beneath my grandfather's old factory, a secret my sister just sold for $500,000, launching a war neither of us saw coming. The buzz of my phone on the cheap laminate countertop of my temporary apartment was the only thing that broke the silence. I was thousands of miles from home, neck-deep in a corporate restructuring project in Singapore that was supposed to be the capstone of my career. For the past 6 months, my life had been a blur of spreadsheets, conference calls, and lukewarm hotel coffee. I picked up the phone, expecting another email alert, but it was a text from my sister, Sarah. My relationship with Sarah is complicated. She's the older sister, the practical one, the one who stayed home, married her high school sweetheart, and always looked at my ambitions with a kind of weary condescension. While I was chasing dreams across continents, she was balancing PTA meetings and a part-time job as a dental hygienist. She saw me as the flighty, irresponsible one. I saw her as someone who had clipped her own wings and resented anyone who still knew how to fly. The text read, "Sold your old factory for $500K. You owe me big time for getting that headache off your hands." I read it once, then twice. The winky face emoji at the end seemed to mock me from the screen. My blood ran cold, a glacial freeze that started in my fingertips and crept its way up my arms until it seized my heart. I dropped the phone on the counter with a clatter. $500,000. She was proud of that. She thought she'd done me a favor. The old factory wasn't just some building. It was the Blackwood Mill, our grandfather's legacy, a sprawling brick and timber behemoth on the edge of town that had churned out high-grade textiles for nearly a century before falling silent 20 years ago. To Sarah, it was a crumbling eyesore, a money pit of property taxes and liability insurance. She'd been begging me to sell it for years, to just take what you can get and be done with it. But I knew something she didn't, something our grandfather had told only me on a quiet afternoon in his study just a month before he passed. He'd unrolled a series of old geological surveys, his gnarled finger tracing the faint lines beneath the property. "They think the value is in the bricks and the land it sits on," he'd rasped, his voice thin as parchment. "Fools, the real treasure is under it. Enough lithium to power this whole country for a decade." He wasn't a geologist, but he was a brilliant, obsessive man. He'd spent the last years of his life hiring his own surveyors, quietly confirming his suspicions. He'd left me the factory in his will, not Sarah, with a handwritten note, "You were always the one who could see past the rust." For 5 years, I'd held on to it, paying the taxes out of my own pocket, waiting for the right time, the right partner. I'd just started preliminary confidential talks with a major energy corporation. Their initial informal valuation wasn't $500,000, it was $50 million, minimum. My hands were shaking as I snatched the phone back up. I stabbed at Sarah's contact number. It went straight to voicemail. "Sarah, you have no idea what you've done," her perky recorded voice chirped. "Leave a message." I hung up, my throat too tight to speak. I tried again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. Panic was setting in, a hot, acrid wave of it. How could she even do this? Then I remembered. The power of attorney. I'd given it to her when I left for Singapore, just for emergencies, to handle minor bills, to sign for a package. I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined she would use it to sell my entire future out from under me. My mind raced. Who would buy an old, dilapidated mill for $500,000? Someone local, probably. Someone who saw a bargain on a big plot of land. They wouldn't know the secret. Maybe I could fix this. Maybe I could contact the buyer, explain the mistake, buy it back before they commissioned their own survey. It was a slim hope, but it was all I had. With trembling fingers, I opened my laptop and started searching the county's public property records online. The system was slow, archaic, but after 10 agonizing minutes, the most recent transaction popped up. Blackwood Mill, seller, Sarah Henderson, via POA, buyer. My breath caught in my chest. The buyer wasn't a person. It was a corporation I'd never heard of. M Ventures, LLC. M Ventures. The M felt significant, a tiny hook snagging in the back of my brain. I did a quick search on the LLC. It was brand new, registered only 3 months ago. The registered agent was a generic legal firm, a dead end. But the address? The mailing address for M Ventures LLC wasn't a corporate high-rise. It was a P.O. box in our hometown, the same P.O. box used by one person I knew, Mark, Sarah's smug real estate developer husband. The room started to spin. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't my practical sister making a well-intentioned but ignorant business decision. This was calculated. This was a conspiracy. Mark must have found out. But how? Had I let something slip? Had he gone through Grandpa's old papers? He and Sarah had played me. They knew. They had to have known. The $500K wasn't a sale price. It was a theft, gift wrapped as a favor. They had stolen $50 million from me. I slammed the laptop shut, a guttural roar of fury and betrayal escaping my lips. I had to get home. Now. I was already pulling up flight schedules when my phone buzzed again. It wasn't from Sarah. It was an unknown number. There was no text, just an image attached. My heart stopped. It was a photo, a selfie. It was Sarah and Mark clinking champagne glasses. They were smiling, beaming with triumphant glee, and behind them, out of focus but unmistakable, was the rusted gate of the Blackwood Mill. This wasn't just a sale. This was a victory party. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was toasting to my ruin with my inheritance as her backdrop. For a long moment, I just stared at the picture. The pixels on the screen seemed to swim together, the image of my sister's smiling face warping into a grotesque mask of greed. The champagne bubbles caught the light, little glittering stars celebrating my obliteration. The rage that had been a hot wave was now something different. It cooled, condensed, and sharpened into a diamond-hard point of purpose in the center of my chest. They weren't just celebrating a business deal. They were dancing on the grave of my trust, of our family, of everything I thought we were. The next 90 minutes were a controlled explosion of activity. I called my boss, a man I respected, and fed him a line about a sudden, critical family illness. My voice was eerily calm, betraying none of the inferno raging inside me. He was understanding, told me to take all the time I needed. I threw a week's worth of clothes into a carry-on, my movements robotic and efficient. I sent a single curt email to the energy corporation I'd been in talks with. Deal on hold. Unforeseen complications regarding title. We'll be in touch. I didn't want them getting wind of a sale and approaching M Ventures directly. I needed to control the narrative, and to do that, I needed to be on the ground. The 22-hour journey from Singapore to my hometown was a surreal exercise in suspended animation. The world outside the airplane window was a dark, featureless void, a perfect mirror for the future Sarah and Mark had planned for me. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Fueled by terrible airline coffee and righteous fury, I turned my seat into a war room. I paid the exorbitant fee for the in-flight Wi-Fi, and I started digging. M Ventures was a ghost, just as I'd seen, a shell. But Mark wasn't. His real estate business, Henderson Homes, had a digital footprint a mile wide. And it wasn't a pretty picture. I found articles in the local business journal about a recent condo development that had stalled, leaving investors furious. I found court records for 2 separate supplier lawsuits filed in the last 6 months. Mark wasn't just ambitious. He was desperate. He was drowning. There was no way he had $500,000 in liquid cash to buy the mill. Someone else was bankrolling him. I went back to the county records. The sale had been processed with lightning speed. Normally, a commercial property transfer of that size would take weeks, if not months, to clear all the bureaucratic hurdles. This had been pushed through in less than 3 days. That wasn't just efficient. It was suspicious. It reeked of favoritism, of a greased palm somewhere in the county planning office. I started looking at campaign donations for local officials, cross-referencing names with Mark's known business associates. Nothing obvious jumped out, but I saved all the data. A pattern was there, I just had to find it. When the plane finally touched down, the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow, but the adrenaline was still winning. I walked through customs in a daze, rented the most nondescript sedan I could find, and started driving. I didn't go to my empty apartment. I didn't go to a hotel. I drove straight to their house, the 2-story colonial in the manicured suburban neighborhood they were so proud of. The perfect house for the perfect family, paid for with my future. I parked down the street under the cover of a large oak tree and cut the engine. It was nearly 10 p.m. Lights were on downstairs. Through the large bay window in the living room, I could see Mark. He was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, one hand running agitatedly through his thinning hair. He looked stressed, cornered. Good. Sarah was nowhere in sight. I got out of the car, the cool night air a shock to my system. I crept across the damp lawn, my heart hammering against my ribs, a cold counterpoint to the hot anger in my veins. I didn't know what I was going to do. Confront them? Record them? I just knew I couldn't wait another second. I slipped into the shadows of the meticulously trimmed hedges beside the living room window. It was cracked open just a sliver to let in the autumn air. Mark's voice, tight and strained, drifted out into the darkness. "No, I told you, we can't move yet," he hissed into the phone. "The full geotech survey isn't back. We have the preliminary results, we know it's there, but we need the certified report to get full value from Petrocorp." Petrocorp, not the company I was talking to, a competitor. My blood turned to ice. He had already lined up another buyer. "Listen to me," Mark continued, his voice dropping lower, more conspiratorial. "Just keep a lid on it for another 48 hours. Once the report is in our hands, we flip the property to them. You get your 10%, and we're all happy. Nobody knows, especially not Sarah. She still thinks this is about the zoning variance for the shopping center. She has no idea about the lithium, and it's going to stay that way." The world tilted on its axis. Every assumption I had made, every ounce of rage I had directed at my sister, suddenly felt misplaced. She didn't know. The text message, the winky face, the celebratory champagne. It wasn't a toast to my ruin. It was a toast to what she thought was a clever real estate deal, a way to help her husband build a shopping center and secure their future. She thought she'd sold a worthless pile of bricks for $500,000. She was a pawn, not the queen. Mark was playing us both. He had lied to his own wife, using her as the instrument of his theft, keeping her in the dark about the true scale of his betrayal. A new kind of cold seeped into my bones, a chilling pity mixed with the burning anger. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was preparing to devastate Sarah. When the truth came out, and it would shatter her world far more completely than it would mine. I had lost money, a fortune, yes, but she stood to lose everything. Her husband, her trust, the very foundation of her life. The selfie she sent me wasn't a taunt. It was a cry for help she didn't even know she was making. I backed away from the window, melting back into the deeper shadows of the oak tree. My initial plan to burst in and confront them dissolved. A direct assault wouldn't work. Mark was a cornered animal, and he would lie, deny, and manipulate Sarah to his side. He'd paint me as the crazy, jealous sibling, swooping in to sabotage their success. I needed proof, irrefutable, undeniable proof that would tear down his web of lies so completely that even Sarah, blinded by love and years of practiced denial, would be forced to see the truth. I got back in my rental car and drove, not aimlessly, but with a new, colder strategy forming in my mind. Mark needed 2 things, the certified geotech survey and a clean title to flip the property to Petrocorp. I was going to make sure he got neither. My first stop was a 24-hour print shop. I used one of their computers to do a deep dive on Petrocorp. They were a ruthless energy conglomerate known for aggressive acquisitions and a legal team that could best be described as sharks. They wouldn't care about the morality of the deal. They'd only care about its legality. If I could cast a shadow on the legitimacy of the sale, they would back away instantly to avoid getting tangled in a messy lawsuit. My second stop, at 2 a.m., was the home of our family's old lawyer, Arthur Vance. He was in his late 70s, semi-retired, and had handled our grandfather's estate. I didn't care about the hour. I leaned on his doorbell until a light flicked on and he appeared at the door, a silk robe wrapped hastily around his frail frame, his eyes wide with alarm. "What in God's name is going on?" he croaked, peering at me over his spectacles. "Arthur, I'm sorry to wake you," I said, my voice steady, "but Sarah sold the Blackwood Mill." His face paled. "She what? On what authority?" "The power of attorney I gave her." He shook his head, running a hand through his wispy white hair. "That POA was for minor financial matters, for emergencies. It was never intended for the liquidation of a primary asset of that value. A sale like that, made without your direct, informed consent, especially to her husband's shell company, that's constructive fraud." Music to my ears. "Can we stop it?" I asked. "We can file a Ellis pendens on the property first thing in the morning," he said, his legal mind snapping into focus. "It's a notice that the title is the subject of a lawsuit. It won't invalidate the sale immediately, but it will cloud the title so thoroughly that no one, especially not a corporation like Petrocorp, will touch it with a 10-foot pole. It effectively freezes the asset until a judge can sort it out." I felt the first glimmer of hope. "Do it," I said. "File it the second the courthouse opens." He nodded, already looking more awake. "There's more. Your grandfather established a family trust years ago. The mill is its primary asset. You're the beneficiary, but Sarah is listed as the secondary trustee, to step in only upon your death or incapacitation. She has no authority to sell a trust asset. Mark must have missed that detail in the county records. He saw the deed in your name and thought the POA was a golden ticket. He's a sloppy, greedy man." The web wasn't just unraveling. I was about to tear it to shreds. We spent another hour in his study, outlining the legal strategy. As I left just before dawn, Arthur put a hand on my arm. "Be careful," he warned. "Men like Mark don't lose gracefully." I knew he was right. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting for my sister, even if she didn't know it yet. My final stop was an anonymous prepaid phone. From a desolate gas station parking lot, I made a call. I found the name of the chief geologist at the firm Mark was using for the survey, a man named Dr. Albright, through some creative searching on professional networks. I disguised my voice, deepening it slightly. "Dr. Albright," I said when he answered, his voice groggy. "This is a courtesy call from Petrocorp's Internal Risk Assessment Division. We understand you're conducting a survey at the old Blackwood Mill site. We've just received some troubling geological data about seismic instability in that specific sector. We need you to halt all work immediately and quarantine the results pending a full safety review. Do not, under any circumstances, release your report to M Ventures or Mark Henderson. Is that understood?" There was a confused silence on the other end. Yes? Who is this again?" "Your compliance is noted," I said, and hung up. It was a bluff, a complete fabrication, but it would work. No reputable geologist would risk their license and liability by releasing a report against a direct warning from a potential buyer like Petrocorp. I had frozen the survey. I had frozen the title. Mark was trapped. He had a multi-million-dollar deal on the line with a clock ticking, and both his keys had just been stolen. I drove back to his street and parked in the same spot, just as the sun began to rise. A few minutes later, Sarah's minivan pulled out of the driveway, likely to take the kids to school. 10 minutes after that, Mark's oversized pickup truck roared to life. He backed out of the driveway, but he didn't head toward his office. He turned in the opposite direction, towards the west side of town, towards the Blackwood Mill. He was going to check on the survey team. He was walking right into my trap. This was my chance. I just had to get inside that house and find something, anything that tied him directly to Petrocorp before he realized the walls were closing in. I gave him a 2-minute head start, and then, heart-pounding, I got out of my car and walked towards the front door. The spare key was still in the same place it had been for 15 years, under the slightly chipped garden gnome by the rose bushes. My fingers closed around the cold, gritty key. The house was silent as I let myself in, a museum of a life I no longer recognized. Framed photos of my smiling nieces lined the hallway, a cruel reminder of the family Mark was tearing apart. I didn't have much time. I went straight for his home office, a shrine to his own ego decorated in dark wood and leather. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. His laptop was on the desk, password protected, a waste of time. I started searching the desk drawers. They were a chaotic mess of invoices, blueprints for the Phantom Shopping Center, and angry-looking letters from creditors. Then I saw it, tucked into a folder labeled M Ventures. Beneath a copy of the fraudulent deed was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a formal contract, but it was better. It was a signed letter of intent from a VP at Petrocorp, addressed to Mark Henderson. It outlined the terms for their purchase of the Blackwood Mill property for an initial sum of $52 million, contingent on the final geotech report. And stapled to the back was a bank statement showing a wire transfer of $250,000 into M Ventures' account from a subsidiary of Petrocorp. It was an advance. Mark hadn't even used his own money for the initial purchase. He had used the buyer's money to steal the property from me. He hadn't risked a thing. I took a picture of the documents with my phone, my hands shaking with a mixture of vindication and disgust. This was the smoking gun. This was the proof that would burn his entire world to the ground. As I slipped the papers back into the folder, I heard the roar of a familiar engine. Mark's truck. He was back. My blood ran cold. He must have called the survey team and found out they'd been shut down. He'd come back for the paperwork to try and salvage his deal. Panic seized me for a second. There was no back door in the office. I was trapped. I ducked behind the heavy desk just as I heard the front door slam open. "Sarah, are you here?" he bellowed. His footsteps were heavy, angry, pounding towards the office. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. The office door flew open. I could see his polished dress shoes pacing back and forth just inches from my hiding spot. He was muttering to himself, a stream of curses directed at Petrocorp, at the geologists, at the world. He opened a drawer, then slammed it shut. He was looking for the letter. Just as he started to move towards the desk, a new voice echoed from the hallway. "Mark, what's wrong? I got a call from the school. Jenna forgot her lunch." It was Sarah, my sister. Her timing was either a catastrophe or a miracle. "Nothing. Just a headache with a contractor," Mark snapped, his voice tight with false casualness. "I came back to grab some paperwork." "You seem stressed," she said, her voice softer now, concerned. She walked into the office, and I could feel the weight of her presence change the energy in the room. This was it. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, I stood up. The gasp from Sarah was sharp and sudden. Mark spun around, his face a mask of pure shock that quickly curdled into rage. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" he snarled. "I think you mean my house, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I held up my phone, the picture of the Petrocorp letter glowing on the screen. "Or at least the house bought with the down payment on the $52 million you were planning to get from my factory." Sarah looked from me to the phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. $52 million? What are you talking about? You sold it for $500,000. "No, Sarah," I said, my eyes locked on hers, trying to convey a decade of unspoken truths in a single look. "You sold it. For a price he invented. He lied to you. The factory, our grandfather's factory, is sitting on one of the largest lithium deposits in the state. He knew. And he used you to steal it from me. That's insane. She's hysterical, Mark blustered, taking a step towards me. Is it, Mark? I pressed. Is Petrocorp insane? Is their letter of intent hysterical? Or this bank statement showing their $250,000 advance? You told Sarah this was for a shopping center, but you were flipping it for 100 times what you paid. You weren't just betraying me, you were betraying her. Sarah slowly took my phone. Her eyes scanned the documents, her face draining of all color. The little details, the tiny lies Mark must have told her for months, were suddenly clicking into place. I could see the dawning horror in her eyes as the carefully constructed reality of her life crumbled into dust. She looked up at her husband, her expression utterly shattered. You told me we were in trouble, that this was the only way to save our home. I did it for us, Mark pleaded, his bravado finally cracking. For our family. Our family? Sarah's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. You built our family on a lie, funded by theft from my own sister. The fight went out of him then. He collapsed into his expensive leather chair, a deflated man whose schemes had finally caught up with him. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Arthur Vance, true to his word, had filed the lis pendens that morning. Petrocorp, upon being formally notified of the fraudulent conveyance and the clouded title, immediately rescinded their offer and launched their own legal action against Mark to recoup their advance. The geotech survey was officially my property, and it confirmed everything my grandfather had suspected. The energy corporation I had originally been in talks with came back to the table, and this time we closed a deal that honored the land's true value. Mark lost everything. Faced with multiple lawsuits and criminal fraud charges, he had to sell the house and his business to cover legal fees. Sarah, in a display of strength I had never seen in her, filed for divorce. She took the kids and moved into a small apartment, refusing a single cent of my money, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. A few months later, she called me. It was the first time we had spoken since that day in the office. Her voice was different, quieter, but clearer. I'm sorry, she said, and I could hear the years of resentment and misunderstanding dissolving in those two words. I never saw you clearly. I was so focused on what I didn't have that I couldn't see what you were trying to build, and I let him use that against you. He used it against both of us, I replied, my own throat tight. The money changed my life, of course, but the real treasure wasn't the lithium under the ground. It was the truth that had been unearthed. I set up a trust for my niece's education and helped Sarah get back on her feet with a loan for a new business, one she paid back with interest. Our relationship isn't what it was. It's not built on duty or shared history anymore. It's something new, something forged in the fire of betrayal and rebuilt, brick by painful brick, on a foundation of hard-won honesty. The old factory is gone now, replaced by a clean energy facility that powers thousands of homes. But my grandfather's legacy, the one he truly wanted to leave me, wasn't just in the ground. It was in seeing past the rust to find what was truly valuable underneath.